In one of Chicago's busiest neighborhoods in Little Italy, there stood a small restaurant called Mama's Kitchen. From the outside, it looked ordinary, maybe even a little run down. The paint was peeling, the neon sign flickered, and inside, you'd find mismatched tables, worn vinyl chairs, and faded photos of Italy covering the walls. But in the kitchen of this humble restaurant worked a treasure that no one seemed to appreciate. Chef Marcus Romano was 58 years old, a quiet man with calloused hands and tired eyes that still sparkled with passion. Every morning at 6 a.m., he'd arrive at the restaurant, and he wouldn't leave until nearly midnight. He approached each dish like an artist approaches a canvas, transforming simple ingredients into culinary masterpieces with a care and precision that seemed almost spiritual. But Tony Castellano, the restaurant owner, had never understood Marcus's value. "Marcus, what is this?" Tony would shout regularly, waving his arms in frustration. "Customers want fast food, convenience. They want their meals in 10 minutes, not 30. You're still cooking like it's 1950. Marcus never argued back. He'd simply nod, lower his head, and return to his station. He understood that food wasn't just about filling stomachs. It was about love, respect, tradition. But who would understand that philosophy in today's world? Tony was 42 years old, a business school graduate who considered himself a modern entrepreneur. He'd inherited Mama's Kitchen from his grandmother, but his vision was completely different. He wanted to modernize everything: pre-made sauces, microwave shortcuts, faster turnover. His focus was purely on profit margins and efficiency. "Look, Marcus," he'd say, pointing out the window, "you see that McDonald's across the street? They serve 1,000 customers a day. We're lucky if we get 50. You know what the problem is? Your old school mentality is killing this business." Marcus's heart ached every time he heard these words. He'd been cooking professionally for over 35 years. He'd worked in Paris, London, New York, some of the most prestigious restaurants in the world. But no one here asked about his background. No one cared about his story or his journey. That Monday evening, Tony had finally made his decision. "Marcus, I'm sorry, but things have to change. I'm bringing in a young chef, someone who understands modern cooking, someone who can work fast and efficiently. I think it's time for you to retire." Marcus felt his hands trembling. 35 years of culinary excellence, and it was ending like this. But he said nothing. He slowly removed his apron, gathered his knives from the station, tools he'd collected over decades, and walked toward the door. "Mr. Castellano," he said quietly, his voice carrying decades of dignity, "I wish you success." And with that, he walked out into the Chicago night, never looking back. The next morning, Tony hired his replacement, Jake Morrison, a fresh culinary school graduate who was 26 years old, energetic and confident. "I know all the latest techniques," Jake boasted during his interview. "I can cut prep time in half and double your profit margins." Tuesday lunch service was approaching. The restaurant didn't typically get many customers during weekday lunches, but today there was a special reservation, a party of 3, scheduled for 1 p.m. At exactly 1 p.m., 3 impeccably dressed individuals entered Mama's Kitchen. There was a sophisticated woman in her 50s, accompanied by 2 men in expensive suits. They moved with the careful observation of people who noticed everything: the lighting, the ambience, the cleanliness, the service. "Welcome to Mama's Kitchen," Tony said with his biggest smile, immediately sensing these were important customers. "You have a reservation, I believe?" "Yes," the woman replied, with a refined accent that suggested extensive travel. "We're here for a special evaluation. May we see your menu?" Tony handed over the menu, practically glowing with excitement. Finally, sophisticated customers who would appreciate his vision for the restaurant. The guests ordered thoughtfully, classic Italian-American dishes that Marcus had perfected over the years: osso buco, homemade gnocchi with truffle sauce, and tiramisu for dessert. In the kitchen, Jake was sweating bullets. Everything he'd learned in culinary school seemed inadequate for the complexity of these traditional recipes. The osso buco was tough and flavorless. The gnocchi was dense and heavy. The truffle sauce tasted artificial. When the dishes arrived at the table, the 3 visitors exchanged meaningful glances. They each took a few small bites, made notes on discreet notepads, and then largely left their plates untouched. The woman signaled Tony over to their table. "Excuse me," she said politely, but with obvious concern. I need to ask you something. Doesn't Chef Marcus Romano work here? Tony was stunned. You know Marcus? Of course we know Chef Romano, the woman replied. We're from the Michelin Guide. We came specifically to evaluate his cuisine. We'd heard he was working here and wanted to consider this establishment for our guide. Tony felt the blood drain from his face. Michelin Guide, the most prestigious restaurant rating system in the world, the difference between obscurity and international recognition. I let him go yesterday, Tony stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. You fired Marcus Romano? The woman's voice rose in disbelief. Do you have any idea who he is? I thought he was he seemed like just a regular cook. A regular cook? The woman looked at her companions incredulously. Marcus Romano graduated from the Culinary Institute of America with highest honors. He trained under Daniel Boulud at Le Bernardin. He was the executive chef at Osteria Francescana in Modena for 5 years. He worked directly with Thomas Keller at the French Laundry. He's considered one of the finest Italian cuisine specialists in North America. Tony's world crumbled around him. Marcus Romano. The Marcus Romano? The chef he'd read about in culinary magazines? The master who'd cooked for presidents and celebrities? But why was he working here? Tony asked weakly. Because, the woman explained, her voice softening with respect. When his wife was diagnosed with Alzheimer's 3 years ago, he left his position as executive chef at Le Bernardin to move back to Chicago to care for her. He wanted to work somewhere quiet, somewhere without pressure, where he could still do what he loved while being close to home. We heard through the culinary network that he was here, and we came to evaluate your restaurant for possible inclusion in our guide. Tony sank into the nearest chair. A Michelin star, international recognition, media attention, celebrity clientele, and he'd thrown it all away because he couldn't see past his own assumptions. Where can we find Chef Romano now? The woman asked. I don't know, Tony whispered. I don't even have his home address. The Michelin team stood up, left money for their untouched meals, and walked out without another word. Tony spent the next 3 days in a desperate search across Chicago. He called every restaurant, every culinary school, every food supplier. He posted on social media, called food critics, reached out to anyone who might know where Marcus had gone. Finally, on Friday afternoon, he found him. Marcus was sitting in a small cafe in Lincoln Park, quietly reading a newspaper and drinking espresso. He looked older somehow, more tired, but there was still that unmistakable dignity in his posture. Chef Romano, Tony said breathlessly as he approached the table. Please, I need to talk to you. Marcus looked up slowly, his expression neutral. Hello, Mr. Castellano. Please come back. I made a terrible mistake. I didn't understand. Marcus folded his newspaper carefully. Mr. Castellano, I'm the same person I was on Monday. The same chef who you said was old-fashioned and inefficient. What exactly has changed? Everything. I learned who you really are, what you've accomplished. And if you hadn't learned those things, Marcus asked quietly, if no one had told you about my background, would you still consider me just an old man standing in the way of progress? Tony couldn't answer. The question hung in the air like an accusation, because they both knew the truth. You know, Mr. Castellano, Marcus continued, his voice gentle but firm, true culinary excellence isn't found in speed or efficiency or profit margins. It's found in respect. Respect for ingredients, respect for tradition, respect for the people who eat your food. When I worked at your restaurant, I was the same chef I'd always been. My skills, my passion, my dedication. None of that changed based on whether you knew my resume. Please, Tony pleaded, give me another chance. I want to learn from you. I want to understand what real cooking means. Marcus studied Tony's face for a long moment, looking for sincerity. Finally, he smiled slightly. All right, Mr. Castellano, but if I return, things will be different. This won't be just an employer-employee relationship. You'll work alongside me in the kitchen. You'll learn not just how to cook, but why we cook. You'll understand that every dish tells a story. Tony nodded eagerly, relief flooding through him. And one more thing, Marcus added. Young Jake isn't a bad cook. He just needs guidance, patience, and someone to teach him that speed means nothing without soul. 6 months later, Mama's Kitchen received its first Michelin star. The review praised the restaurant's authentic approach to Italian-American cuisine, and specifically mentioned the masterful hand of Chef Marcus Romano, whose traditional techniques create extraordinary flavor experiences. But the star was just a symbol. The real transformation had happened in the kitchen, in the relationship between Tony and Marcus, and in Tony's understanding of what it meant to value people for who they truly were. Tony had learned to work every station in the kitchen. His hands bore new scars from burns and cuts, but also new skills. He understood now that cooking wasn't just about following recipes. It was about understanding ingredients, respecting processes, and putting love into every dish. Jake, rather than being fired, had become Marcus's eager student. Under the master's guidance, he was learning that culinary school had taught him techniques, but only experience could teach him soul. Remember, Marcus would tell his students during the quiet prep hours, anyone can follow a recipe. But a true chef understands that cooking is an act of service, of love, of respect for those who will taste your work. Every plate that leaves this kitchen carries a piece of your heart. The restaurant began attracting food enthusiasts from around the world. Food critics made pilgrimages to taste Marcus's interpretations of classic dishes, but Marcus remained unchanged, humble, dedicated, passionate about his craft, rather than the recognition. Tony often reflected on how close he'd come to losing everything. "I almost destroyed something beautiful because I couldn't see past my own assumptions," he told a local food magazine. "Marcus taught me that wisdom often comes in quiet packages, and that the most valuable employees aren't always the ones who make the most noise." The story of Mama's Kitchen became legendary in Chicago's culinary circles. It was told as a cautionary tale about assumptions and as an inspiring example of redemption and respect. Marcus continued working at the restaurant, but now he also taught at the local culinary institute, sharing his knowledge with the next generation of chefs. He never sought fame or celebrity status. He found his satisfaction in the perfect texture of fresh pasta, the exact timing of a risotto, the smile on a customer's face when they tasted something extraordinary. One evening, as the dinner rush was winding down, Tony found Marcus cleaning his station with the same meticulous care he brought to everything. "Chef," Tony said, "I need to ask you something. Why did you come back? After how I treated you, why did you give me another chance?" Marcus looked up from his knives, which he was cleaning and organizing with practiced precision. "Because, Mr. Castellano, everyone deserves the opportunity to grow. You made a mistake, but you were willing to learn from it. That's more than many people can say. And besides," he smiled, "this kitchen needed someone to remember why we do this work. It's not for the money or the recognition. It's for the simple joy of feeding people well." Today, Mama's Kitchen is one of Chicago's most celebrated restaurants. But walk into the kitchen and you'll still find Marcus Romano working with the same quiet intensity, the same humble dedication, the same love for his craft that he's carried for over 3 decades. And Tony? He learned that success isn't measured just in profit margins, but in the respect you show the people who make excellence possible. He learned to listen more than he speaks, to observe more than he assumes, and to value wisdom wherever he finds it. This story reminds us that talent and wisdom often come in humble packages. The person washing dishes might be a poet. The quiet person in the corner might be a genius. The old-fashioned employee might hold the keys to excellence that no modern training can teach. Marcus Romano types are all around us, in kitchens, offices, factories, schools. They're the people whose true value becomes apparent only when we take the time to look beyond the surface, beyond our assumptions, beyond our prejudices. Have you ever misjudged someone only to discover their hidden talents? Do you know any quiet masters like Marcus Romano in your own life? Share your stories in the comments below. And if this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe to Touching Stories, because every person has a story worth telling, and every story deserves the respect of being heard. See you in the next story. Until then, remember to appreciate the quiet masters around you. You never know what extraordinary talents they might be hiding.